We broadcast from the unceded lands of the Turrbal, Yagara and Jagera people in Mugginjan, so-called Brisbane. We pay our respects to elders, past and present, and to all First Nations communities across the country. We recognise that Indigenous sovereignty over these lands and waters has never been ceded, and that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities have been resisting, refusing and disrupting colonialism since 1788.
Mutual, ba-la, mutual, ba-la. This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
As radio gets called everything from gag to gadget, but fate is to make radio a power in a world of peace and war.
And the show you are listening to today is Radio Reversal. Today on the show we are going to be talking a lot about political morality and social choice, musing on the philosophical content of some kind of a broader political economic critique. This is very much in the spirit of Radio Reversal.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Radio Reversal. I'm Anna. We're talking this week about the Justice for Stevie-Lee campaign with a dear friend and colleague of mine, Gungarri academic, mother and writer, Dr. Raylene Nixon, whose son, Stevie-Lee Nixon McKellar, was killed in police custody in 2021. I've known Raylene for a couple of years now and I've been following her family's fight for justice for her son, Stevie-Lee Nixon McKellar, since 2023. For those of you who haven't been following the Justice for Stevie-Lee campaign, Raylene's son, Steve, was 27 when he was killed in police custody in Toowoomba in 2021. In our interview a couple of months ago, Raylene reflected on how disappointing the coronial inquest process was for her family. How she talked a lot about how violent it was to sit in an inquest and have the council assisting the police paint this portrait of her son that was just completely at odds with the young man that she raised and loved. And this week she talks, I guess, about receiving the findings of that inquest and what happens next for her family. There's a big content warning on this week's show because we are talking with Raylene about Steve's death in custody, as well as her family's experiences of the coronial inquest process, their accounts of the kind of further brutalisation of their family through these really punishing processes. There's discussions of racism and racial violence, as well as graphic descriptions of physical harm causing death. So if anything you hear in today's show does trigger difficult emotions and you need a hand processing them, as always, please do remember that you can call 13 11 14 or 13 YARN for free confidential counselling support. And of course, also, reach out to your own friends and to your trusted network. None of us should be carrying these kinds of stories by ourselves, and they should shake something loose in all of us. So this is Dr. Raylene Nixon speaking to me for Radio Reversal this week.
I am Gungarri. My family's from southwest Queensland, so my home originally is on the Maranoa River out in Mitchell. We have a big family out there. I guess what brought me to this place is my son, as you said, was killed at the hands of Queensland Police on the 7th of October 2021. It was 1 month and 1 week after I graduated from the University of Melbourne with a PhD. And I guess so what I'd trained for the last 14 years was around addressing global issues such as this. But I just would say, losing a child is the ultimate tragedy. There is nothing more devastating. This loss has been exacerbated by more injustice.
I became a parent recently, as you know, and I think it's just made me think more and more about the experience and the gravity of it. I think having a baby in your arms makes you really think about the future, and I hope people who listen to this don't abstract themselves from it, really think about that. We have talked a little bit about what happened to Stevie-Lee before, and you've had to relive this a number of times now in trying to get some accountability for what happened. For people who haven't heard much about the story, do you want to tell us, I guess, a little bit about what happened from your family's perspective?
What happened on that day? Yeah, so Steve was sick. He'd been in hospital for asthma And we later found out pneumonia 2 days before that incident, and he was trying to get home to my mum. So 2021 was in the midst of COVID. I was in Victoria and we were in our third lockdown, I think. He knew he was sick and he was trying to get home to be looked after. He was sitting in a car in his auntie's driveway when a neighbour had put out a call to say there's a suspicious car in their street. 2 police arrived minutes later. And the thing for us, and this is also, I know we're going to get into the body-worn camera footage later, but we've seen the footage, and what the police have said has happened doesn't align with what's on the footage. There is no footage of what they say happened. So in terms of, well, it looks to us like the police have gotten out of the car, and rather than communicate with Stephen, who was sitting in a car, doing nothing more than sitting in a car at that time, they've just come in like cowboys. They've smashed the window. He's moved from the driver's seat to the passenger seat to try and get away from the smashed window and the glass. So what they've said is he's tried to get out of the car and rush at one of the other officers. I don't believe that, because he was so sick. He had pneumonia. He's not going to jump out of a car and try and fight 2 police officers. Also, he wasn't violent to start with. But when you have a look at the coronial transcripts, it says that the police officer that sort of caught him when he got out of the car on that side says they've become entangled. But what I'd say has happened is he's come at him and they've just started hitting him. You can see at some point they've turned on the body-worn footage, and this is where it starts to play, and you can see him being kicked. You can see him being hit by batons. And the narrative that they don't want you to hear, that you won't see in the coronial transcripts or the findings handed down by the coroner, is Stephen saying, "Help me, help me, help me. You've got me, you've got me, you've got me." Our forensic expert has said he couldn't get on the ground because the baton was holding him up. He was trying to get on the ground and they wouldn't let him. So this is a violent altercation, but the one that my son was the victim of, he was not the perpetrator of this attack.
Your family have been struggling for justice, for some kind of justice for Steve for years now, since he was killed. And initially that meant going through the coronial inquest process. Can you talk about that process?
Well, the coronial inquest for families, it's our only avenue to seek justice. And I guess, you know, as a researcher, I did some research coming into it to see what to expect. And I was cautiously hopeful that, you know, from what I had seen and what I understood of the incident, that there might be an opportunity for us to get some answers. We wanted to know what was the incident that happened that precipitated this event? Why did they pursue him with such aggression, with such violence? Why wasn't he treated like any other person?
Given any warnings, given any directions?
He was given no commands. He wasn't told to get out of the car. They just smashed the window, dragged him from the car, they beat him, and ultimately he died. And why did Stephen die that day?
Yeah.
That's what we thought we were going into the coronial inquest to find out. And we wanted them to acknowledge the root cause of this, not just the incident itself.
Yep.
The coroner's own manual says that they'll spend more time investigating the root cause that precipitated the death, to find out what things we can do better to prevent future deaths. So all we're asking is for what the coroner's own handbook said that they were going to provide. We didn't want any more or any less, but we didn't even get that.
Yeah, and this is, I think, something you've talked about before, about the false promise of coronial inquests, because these, for people who know a bit about the history, you might know that it was the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody that one of the recommendations, and one of the recommendations that has been implemented, was to enforce coronial inquests into the deaths of every Aboriginal person who dies in custody. And so when that was demanded, I think there was a lot of optimism that this would be a site of truth-telling. But one of the things that you've spoken about consistently since your experiences of the inquest process with Steve is that it's really for you been a process of being silenced and also further brutalised by these systems.
Yeah, the coronial inquest wasn't what we expected it was going to be, where we thought we were coming in to share an open dialogue to get to the bottom of what happened so that we can make, systemic changes to the institutions and to policies that lead to these deaths. It was just an alibi for the police.
So initially in the inquest, one of the things that you spoke about was the use of the lateral vascular neck restraint, which is a particular form of physical restraint that the police in Queensland use.
Yeah.
Which has, I believe, been banned in a lot of other jurisdictions.
The use of chokeholds or lateral vascular neck restraints are banned in every other state and territory in Australia except for Queensland.
And after Steve's death, I believe you had some initial success in pushing the government to temporarily roll back the use of the restraint.
Yeah. So Katarina Carroll was the police commissioner at that time. Shortly after Stephen's death, she did make the decision to ban the use of the chokeholds in Queensland, but that quickly got turned around when the police union president put pressure on her to say, it doesn't matter that they have 50 other use of force options, they still need this one in case their lives are at risk. So although they don't train it in their academies anymore, the police who have been trained still have licence to use it.
So after going through the coronial inquest process that you've described in previous interviews as really quite harrowing, and you've written and theorised the way that this has just exacerbated the violence, the extraordinary violence your family has already experienced. Tell us about the inquest results and what happened.
Well, it was incredibly disappointing but not at all surprising. Having been through the inquest and seen how carefully curated the council assist curated the coronial inquest itself, like the failure to accept racism within the scope.
Extraordinary, right? Yeah. If we return just briefly to that coronial handbook that says this is about root causes.
Exactly. Yeah. But even I was surprised because there is not one single recommendation that's come out of the findings. Not one recommendation. Basically, you'll pick up the findings and it just says there's nothing to see here. But not only that, it actually states in the coronial findings that, the coroner understands that the family might think that Stephen died as a result of the lateral vascular neck restraint because of the close proximity to him dying and when it was applied. But it's an emotional response, and that's not what killed him.
Again, like this kind of history of the push for coronial inquests came out, at least in part, of the fact that the police would so consistently say that Aboriginal people who died in police custody just happened to die of natural causes, unrelated to the fact that they were in custody.
Yeah.
And so people pushed for coronial inquests to become a way to, challenge that story, only to come full circle.
Exactly. So it defeats the purpose of having coronial inquests and putting already grieving families through more grief. But it comes back to, not releasing the body-worn camera footage to the public, for the public to for the public to see for themselves what's happened. What's the purpose of having it? Like, I thought the whole purpose of having police body-worn camera footage is for transparency and so that the public can see for themselves the events as they unfolded.
So the findings of the coronial inquest, this very long process, were delivered to you how?
By email. I was sent an email the day before saying the coronial findings will be handed down by email the next day.
Which means, there's no meaningful opportunity for media engagement with these findings. There's no kind of inquest that people can go to for solidarity, for closure, for,
Yeah.
It's just, you opening an email.
Oh, look, it's all techniques, I think. And not only was it delivered by email, it was delivered at 3:00 on a Friday afternoon. And I just think, the outrage worldwide from George Floyd with his footage being captured by camera and shown worldwide, this is very similar to what has happened there. You have an Aboriginal man that's been attacked, that's been bashed by police. He's not saying, I can't breathe, though he couldn't breathe. He's saying, help me, help me, help me. You've got me, you've got me, you've got me. In the inquest itself, which you still won't find in the coroner's report that's been handed down, the police officer says, did you hear him say, you've got me? And they say yes, but he didn't get down. He couldn't get down. And I don't know a perpetrator of a violent attack that's saying, help me, you've got me, help me, you've got me. He's the victim. And the fact that, there are no recommendations, there's no accountability, there's no transparency.
And this is, it is, it shouldn't be relevant because anyone dying in police custody in any context is an act of state violence. But Steve wasn't even charged with a crime.
Well, this is one of the other things that come out of the coronial inquest is he was never told that he was under arrest. He was never asked to get out of the car. And it was put to them that he wasn't told he was under arrest because they didn't know what they were arresting him for. They didn't know if he'd committed a crime. He was unarmed. He was gravely sick.
And he was sitting in a car.
And he was sitting
outside a relative's house.
Yeah. And his punishment for that is death. And there's no punishment for the people who killed him.
So this is Toowoomba 2021. And it's not even he's not even the first person in that last couple of, in that sort of same period of time in Toowoomba.
It's the second Indigenous person in 10 months to be killed at the hands of police. But there's nothing to see here.
According to the coroner.
Yeah.
It's just extraordinary. And I think, I wish it was more surprising as you've said, I think some of the particular brutality of the bureaucracy is sometimes surprising. You think they're going to try and humanize things at least a bit.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's still a bit gobsmacking when they don't.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, so you've talked a little bit about this already, but one of the demands that your family have made following the inquest and these incredibly disappointing findings of the inquest is for the Queensland Police to release the footage, the body-worn camera footage, which your family have seen and the people involved in the inquest have seen, but obviously others have not. Can you talk a bit about why that's important to you?
I'd say the coronial inquest has failed us and has failed to achieve any form of justice for what has happened to Stephen. So the next step is for the public to see for themselves what has happened.
Yeah.
I think, it's not only the lives and the dignity of our people that's at stake here, it is the integrity and the trust of the institutions that claim to serve and protect us as communities and in our societies.
I think that's a really good point. Like, even if you believe in the police as an institution, even if you think they are necessary and important, then accountability is something you should believe in, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those things that obviously I think for many of us listening, and certainly for us at Radio Reversal, we're pretty staunchly opposed to the existence of police. But even if you're not, even if you think there's a role for police to play, these kind of points of accountability are kind of crucial. If you don't think the police have done anything wrong.
Handing down the findings, it took them 48 hours to review our submissions to release the body-worn camera footage. They come back and just said, no, we're not going to do it. The reason is because they're concerned that the footage could be taken out of context. So I think that in itself tells the story.
Yeah, that's Dr. Raylene Nixon talking to us on Radio Reversal. And a moment, if you've been listening to this conversation and thinking this seems absolutely outrageous, and reflecting on what it means that the coroner can refuse the family's request for body-worn camera footage to be released of Stevie-Lee's death on the basis that it might be taken out of context, you can support the family by heading over to their change.org petition to put pressure on the Queensland coroner to release that footage. Head to change.org and search for Justice for Stevie-Lee, or look up Justice for Stevie-Lee on Instagram to follow the page and get up to date with all of the campaign updates. We're going to jump right back into this conversation with Dr. Raylene Nixon now, talking a bit further about the ongoing campaign of her family for justice for Stevie-Lee, and in particular why the family wants the body-worn footage of Stevie-Lee's last moments released to the public. I have not, of course, seen the footage, but I imagine it will be self-evident to us what has happened, in the same way it is to your family. I also know that people who are determined to believe that the police are always in the right are potentially likely to interpret that footage differently. Are you concerned about that?
Look, I think people will take what they want from it. I just think it's important to give people the opportunity to see for themselves.
Yeah.
And if there's nothing to hide, then release the footage, because we're sick to death of police officers killing our men, women and children, and there being no consequences for it. Something has to change. We have to draw a line in the sand and say no more. There has to be accountability. Otherwise, nothing's ever going to change. And if we don't stick up for ourselves and fight for our men, women and children, then who will?
And evidently the coronial inquest process is not a space where the truth comes out. And, you know, I mean, I think...
Well, definitely not in Queensland, but I mean, it has been a source. If you have a look what's happening in the Northern Territory, but that's only recent.
Yes.
The rights of Aboriginal people are still denied. We're not treated as people who have the same rights as everybody else in this country. And it's time that these issues are brought out into the open and acknowledged and dealt with. Because these problems don't start with us as Aboriginal people, it starts with the institutions that allow this behaviour to continue.
Yeah. And I think you've talked about this, including quite recently with our wonderful friend, Toowoomba writer and scholar Amy McGuire, about the sort of protracted time scale of the violence of coronial inquests, where you have this, as you said, like one of the worst things that can happen to someone, the death of your child. And then you have this kind of extraordinarily prolonged process of having to relive and revisit and kind of constantly be ruminating on this because of how long coronial inquests take. Can you talk about, I guess, what that feels like to be in that process for so long?
Look, I think it does feel like it was a strategy. Stephen passed away in 2022. We didn't have the coronial inquest until 2023. And I guess in hindsight, I did put in a lot of hope and effort into the coronial inquest and hoping that something good might come out of this incredibly terrible thing that's happened. Just to be bitterly disappointed again, which does again pose the question of what is the purpose of it then? And if the strategy is just to absolve the police or the institutions of any wrongdoing, I don't see what purpose it actually serves in its current form, which is why I think there needs to be independent oversight. And from the experience that we've had going through the coronial inquest and seeing how close they all are, it looks from where we were sitting that it's impossible for them to hold to hold their own colleagues accountable.
Yeah.
I think it's so important that, particularly for Indigenous deaths in custody, that they have some sort of independent or federal oversight.
This is that kind of like slipperier place of power, you know, where it's not even just at the level of the structures. It's also at the level of the fact that, you know, people all went to university together. There are these small, you know, small networks of people in these kind of legal and paralegal spaces, and they know each other and they socialise together and they're invested in each other's lives.
Exactly.
And I think that this is something that I think you've pointed to before, the way that when you enter those systems, you're also entering an ecosystem, you know, that where people know each other, they've got all of these pre-existing relationships, and the sort of fantasy is that they won't impact what happens in that room, and
exactly,
it's a bit delusional.
And, you know, from before we even stepped into the courthouse, before we got to the steps of the Toowoomba courthouse, before entering the coronial inquest, it felt like we were the enemy and that it was us against them. And coronial inquests aren't about winning or losing, or it's about having open dialogue, being transparent about the incidences that led to this event, the event itself, what happened after the event, with the idea of looking at the systemic and institutional things that we can do to prevent this from happening again. That's what we thought we were going in there for. So as I said before, we didn't want any more or any less. We just want what the coronial the coroner's own handbook said that they were going to do. Yeah.
And I know you've talked about this a lot, but I remember that the very first protest in Toowoomba, or the kind of, I guess, vigil protest that opened the coronial inquest, and how from the very beginning of that process, your family was experiencing being told what you could and couldn't say, what you could and couldn't do, what you could wear.
That's it, right.
What you could bring in. You know, this is this very constraining process.
Yeah, so, you know, any sense of humanity towards Stephen was disallowed. They didn't want to see him as a person. And in the Council Assist's opening comments, it's all about his mental health, his criminalising him. You know, the narrative was created from the very beginning that Stephen deserved to die. He didn't deserve to be treated with a person that has the same rights as everybody else. And as a mother, sitting through that in that courtroom was horrific, because you know that's not true.
It's unimaginable.
They criminalised him and blamed him for his own demise, but the fact is he was sitting in a car, he was unarmed, he wasn't a threat, and he was killed. He was alive when they got there, and he died when they left. He was dead when they left. So in that, whether it was a 20-minute interaction, how can they find that
there's nothing to see here?
There's nothing to see here.
That was Dr. Raylene Nixon speaking to me earlier this week. That's all we have time for in today's show. But if you'd like to hear my full conversation with Dr. Nixon, as well as a follow-on discussion with Raylene and Dr. Helena Kalick about the sort of broader limitations of coronial inquests in the colony, please head over to radioreversal.org. As I mentioned earlier, you can subscribe to our podcast if you've got some money spare. You can send it our way to help support the work we're doing in turning our weekly live radio program into a weekly podcast. And if you jump on board as a paid subscriber, you'll get first access to standalone podcast series like the Challenging Colonial Propaganda series that Raylene's interview is part of. And finally, don't forget that the change.org petition for justice for Stevie-Lee is currently calling for signatures to put pressure on the Queensland coroner to release the body-worn footage of the night that Steve died. The family are adamant, as you heard, that it is important for people to be able to make up their own minds about what happened to Steve that night. I want to end the show just with a huge thanks to Dr. Raylene Nixon and her family for their tireless advocacy. As Raylene said, losing a child is probably one of the worst things that can ever happen to someone, and to see Raylene show up day after day to advocate for justice, to defend her beautiful son, even in the worst circumstances, is incredibly inspiring, and it should provoke in all of us a desire, I think, to stand in solidarity in whatever ways we can. So at the very least, please head over to change.org and sign the petition to release the body-worn camera footage, and follow the Justice for Stevie-Lee page on Instagram for updates on the campaign as it unfolds. We'll do our best to keep across that as well and keep letting you know about opportunities to stand in solidarity. But if you follow the page, it'll be the most direct way to make sure that you can support the work that the family are doing. I should also mention the tireless work of the Dudgewa Foundation, who are a not-for-profit organisation set up to support the families of Aboriginal people who've died in police custody. They're doing incredible advocacy and family support work right now, and they could definitely use your donations. So if you're not already, please do consider donating to Dudgewa to support the work they're doing as well. You've been listening to the Radio Reversal podcast. If you want to hear more from Raylene about her work and her family's ongoing struggle, please make sure you've subscribed to the Radio Reversal podcast over at radioreversal.org. Paid subscribers will get first listen to our brand new standalone series, Challenging Colonial Propaganda, which includes these really hard-hitting conversations with people like Raylene, who've had beloved family members killed in police custody or in prison, as well as interviews with police and prison abolitionists about what the abolition of policing and prisons might look like in practice. We talk about the role of things like pop culture, from TV shows to mainstream crime reporting to kids' books, and about the way that police insinuate themselves into institutions like schools and libraries and community groups in order to launder their image and make themselves seem like a normal part of everyday life. In that series, you'll hear a whole bunch of people reflecting on the role of propaganda in things like elections, why tough on crime discourses seem to be so effective in paving the pathway for intensifying fascism like we're seeing here in so-called Queensland. And of course, you'll hear Raylene and our dear colleague and friend Dr. Helena Kalick talk about their work on coronial inquests in the colony and how they operate as these key sites in which the violence of settler colonialism is laundered and eventually disappeared. We talk about how this disappearance relates to colonial propaganda, how inquests and inquiries serve as spaces of performance which make it seem like the state is accountable and transparent, while ensuring that the real truth of police violence remains hidden. So lots to look out for, and lots to come on our weekly podcast too. Join us next week as we head to Lutruwita, Tasmania, to catch the Geographers for Palestine discussion on the nature of Palestinian repression and the perpetual censorship of Palestinian free speech, both here in Queensland and globally. You're listening to the Radio Reversal podcast. I'm Anna, and I'll catch you again next week.